One of the messages that I talked about in France was the little time of trouble. And trouble is simply defined as having difficulty or problems. That's a pretty simple definition for trouble. One evening I was driving my father's Volkswagen to town to pick up my brother who'd come in from college on the bus. And I was going around a particular curve, not exceedingly fast at all, but I dropped off on a very high berm, cut back on way too quickly, and lost control and rolled the car. I knew I was in trouble. Not that I was afraid I was paralyzed or maybe almost died, but I had to face my father now. And well, you have to understand, my father was like a stick of dynamite with a blasting cap in it, and if someone flicking a spark right by it, he was able to explode at any given time, and it took him about an hour before he exploded. And anyhow, I was put out of the house, and trouble continued to begin for me for a little bit. But fortunately, that got worked out. The Bible, though, the Bible portrays a picture of much trouble for this world and also for God's people. For example, in the Apocalypse, in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, we read a prophecy, interestingly, about which church? The church of Smyrna. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10. He says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Many interpreters have understood this 10 days to be 10 prophetic years of terrible persecution under the Romans, when many Christians were martyred. Sort of a famous text here in Revelation 6:8. "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." Doesn't sound like a pleasant picnic, does it? Under the fifth seal, in Revelation chapter 6 and verse 9, "And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw unto the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held." We know that Revelation 13 describes a confederacy of evil which demands obedience from God's people, or else they will not let them live. Revelation describes what the Bible calls the 7 last plagues. And I really appreciate Brother Leon in that he would oftentimes speak of this. He said, but notice it says last plagues. There are plagues before this. Well, this world has seen several plagues. We think of the bubonic plague and maybe the COVID plague now. But these are the 7 last plagues, and these are plagues so devastating that if they were universal, the whole earth and its inhabitants would collapse before they finished. Revelation chapter 16 and verse 18 describes a great earthquake such as never had been before. "And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake." How great? "A great earthquake such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great." Have you ever heard of a place called Krakatoa? Yep. Krakatoa? We know that Krakatoa has erupted on different occasions, but there is evidence that in the year AD 535, Krakatoa erupted in such a way that it transformed this world and even the history of this world. Scientists base this upon tree ring growth, they base it upon the layers of ice in the Arctic and Antarctica, that something happened that caused basically a drought. It caused a shut-in of light, and the historical records from this time tell us that there was a period of 3 or 4 years of intense darkness, that the sun would hardly shine, that there was this haze in the air, and crops were dying. There was not enough sun to produce rain from the evaporation of the oceans. And so there was great trouble upon this earth at that time. It was considered to be the equivalent of what we today call a nuclear winter, except that nuclear winter lasted for over 3 years. The cooler temperatures even allowed the bubonic plague to spread like wildfire. The sun was darkened and many people felt the end had come. They probably looked at some of these apocalyptic prophecies and they were trying to see how they fit in here. But friends, whatever happened then, something greater is happening in the future. Well, we could speak of many other things. The Central China flood of 1931 that killed at least 2 million people, or the Lisbon earthquake, or more recently the Haiti earthquake of 2010, Hurricanes Andrew, Katrina, and even the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki could hardly be left off the list of troubles, tribulations, and calamities that have come upon our world. Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 spoke about general signs of his coming and the end of the world. And you know, they're all associated with bad things. They're all associated with trouble. In Matthew 24 verses 6 through 9, he said, "Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake." It doesn't sound like he was offering his followers a nice picnic. Isn't that something? He goes on to say in verse 19, "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days." And then in verse 21, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." Now we translate this word tribulation from a Greek word, I have it here, but it's used 45 times in the New Testament. 21 times it's translated as tribulation. It's also translated afflicted 18 times, trouble as 3 times, and it's also translated as anguish, persecution, and burdened 1 time each. It sounds like the Bible speaks a lot about trouble. Now, I'm not sure where the prosperity preachers fit into all this. I don't think they preach about these texts very much. But the truth is, nobody knows trouble like Seventh-day Adventists. We speak of something we call the great time of trouble. We speak of something called Jacob's time of trouble. And we speak about something that we have coined a phrase for, we call the little time of trouble. Have you ever heard of these expressions? Mm-hmm. Now, Ellen White uses the term, the time of trouble, hundreds of times in her writings. But she only uses the term great time of trouble 1 time, just once. A search of the database gives the expression time of Jacob's trouble 86 hits. Though many are duplications, and very interestingly, Ellen White never, not even once, uses the phrase little time of trouble. Did you know that? We've heard about it all of our Adventist lives, haven't we? Little time of trouble. But she never uses this phrase. This phrase, in fact, is only found 1 time in the database, and that's in a heading that has been supplied by the publishers in the compilation book, Last Day Events. Now, in responding to a letter to the White estate asking if Ellen White used the term little time of trouble, William Fagel wrote the following to this person. He says, "Dear whoever, I checked the database of Mrs. White's published writings, and the only reference was the title of the chapter in Last Day Events to which you already referred. The passage from early writings, which it quotes, seems to give the basis for the expression, but it doesn't actually use it. Interesting. The term little time of trouble was in wide circulation long before Last Day Events was published just a few years ago, but apparently the expression does not trace back to Mrs. White's own writings." He goes on to say, "That's about all I've found up till now. If you come up with something more, I'd be grateful if you'd share it here. Thank you for writing. God bless." And that was by William Fagel, a director at the Ellen White a state branch office at Andrews University in Bering Springs, and that was from July 28 of 2000. And to my knowledge, nothing else has been found since then. So the question is there a basis for such a concept as a little or smaller time of trouble? Now, there are some concepts that are taught in the Bible that we as Christians or theologians have coined names for. That name, though, doesn't appear in the Bible. For example, incarnation. What does the word incarnation mean, literally? It's a Latin, from two Latin words. It means in flesh, in the flesh. Did Jesus Christ come and become incarnate? Did he come in flesh?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a trick question. Sure he did. And so the term incarnation, while it's not a scriptural term, it does, by its definition, accurately reflect an inspired concept. What about the term millennium? Millennium. Is that in the Bible? No. But what does millennium mean? 1,000 years. Is there a mention of 1,000 years in the scripture? Yeah. So here's a term that we use that is a term of man-made, man being made by man, but it represents something that's inspired. So the question is, does this concept, little time of trouble, have a basis in inspiration in some way that helps us to understand how things are going to be at the end? Part of the picture. Well, as we proceed in this study, we will see that inspiration portrays what I'm going to call a lesser time of trouble compared to a great time of trouble, which happens before the close of probation. That is, this lesser time of trouble happens before the close of human probation. But let's continue this spiritual journey in the Old Testament book of Daniel. The Old Testament book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. And at that time shall Michael stand up. Now, when he says at that time, referring back to the prior verse, that there's this power that plants its tabernacles between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet shall come to his end, and none shall help him, right? And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Now here Daniel speaks about a time of trouble, such as never was. A great time of trouble, if you please. Now, how do we relate this to what Jesus said in Matthew 24 about that tribulation period? Because we have historically interpreted that tribulation period as being from 538, AD 538 through 1798. And by the way, 538 is just 3 years after 535, when Krakatoa exploded. And that cataclysmic event helped also to set in stage things that brought 538 to pass, by the way, interestingly, as you study the history. Now, each one claims to be a time of trouble or tribulation such as never was. The time of trouble that Jesus is speaking about is a long period of duration, a period of trouble such as never has been, in the sense that it is of a long duration. But now let's look at the timing of this prophecy. It says Michael stands up and his people are delivered. Now, what is this symbolized by Michael standing up? It's the close of human probation. This will be the time when Jesus will say that he that is unjust, let him be unjust still. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he which is just, let him be just still, and he who is righteous, let him be righteous still. Right? There's coming a time when every case will be decided. And when that happens, human probation will close. Whether we know it or not, it will close. It will be over. Every person will have polarized, one direction or the other. We have either polarized toward the good or we have polarized toward the evil. We are polarized where we will be so Christ-like that we'll never change, or we are polarized to the point that we will be willing to kill God's people if that's what it takes to try to fix our problems. But here in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1 now, this time of trouble is after probation closes, and so it's not a time of trouble in length that makes it the great time of trouble. It is a time of trouble of intensity, of intensity. There will never be anything like it prior to that. Concerning this text, in Volume 5 of the Testimonies, Ellen White says, when this time of trouble comes, every case is decided. There is no longer probation, no longer mercy for the impenitent. Now, we get that there's mercy no longer. But the key thing I want you to take from this statement is the word this. This. If I say this book, this table, this chair, does that imply something? What does it imply? I'm talking about one, but there may be others. It's not that chair, it's this chair. It's not that table, it's this table. See? She says concerning Daniel 12:1, when this time of trouble comes, then this happens.
It does suggest that it's, significant.
It is significant.
It's a significant one.
It is significant. In fact, they're all significant in their place. But here we see that when Michael, who is Christ, stands up, that probation closes, and there's a time of trouble such as never been. So this great time of trouble begins with the close of probation after every case has been decided and there's no more calls for mercy. And this is important to remember. Now there's another text that speaks about trouble in the Bible, and I want to take you to it. It's in Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 5 through 7. But this is a little different. And I'm thinking, I'm talking today about the little time of trouble, but maybe we should have a series. We should maybe have a sermon on this great time of trouble, maybe a sermon on this next trouble coming up, which we call Jacob's time of trouble, or the time of Jacob's trouble. Here it says, for thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice, a trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now, and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness? Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So here's something called a time of Jacob's trouble. In the book Patriarchs and Prophets, Ellen White states this concerning this idea. When Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf, then this time of trouble will begin. Now she's making reference to this text about Jacob's time of trouble. And she says that it also begins when Christ's mediation ceases and probation closes. Then the case of every soul will have been decided, and there will be no atoning blood to cleanse from sin. When Jesus leaves his position as man's intercessor before God, the solemn announcement is made. And I made reference to this earlier in Revelation 22:11. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. Then the restraining spirit of God is withdrawn from the earth. As Jacob was threatened with death by his angry brother, so the people of God will be in peril from the wicked who are seeking to destroy them. And as the patriarch wrestled all night for deliverance from the hand of Esau, so the righteous will cry to God day and night for deliverance from the enemies that surround them. It sounds like Jacob's time of trouble is running concurrently with this great time of trouble, and in fact even very parallel to it. There's trouble, there's going to be an attack upon God's people, and they're praying for deliverance. But remember in Daniel 12:1, it says that when that time of trouble begins, it says God's people will be delivered. Remember? And here again we find in this reference the term this. We find the term this. In the second line or part, it says, when Christ shall cease his work as mediator in man's behalf, then this time of trouble. This time. So there she's speaking about this time of trouble. Now, in Great Controversy, we read some more about this time called Jacob's trouble. And it says this, and I've broken it into two slides, this one paragraph. As Satan influenced Esau to march against Jacob, so will he stir up the wicked to destroy God's people in the time of trouble. And as he accused Jacob, he will urge his accusations against the people of God. He numbers the world as his subjects, but the little company who keep the commandments of God are resisting his supremacy. If he could blot them out from the earth, his triumph would be complete. He sees that his holy angels are guarding them, and he infers that their sins have been pardoned, but he does not know that their cases have been decided in the sanctuary above. Let me just pause there. So when probation closes, Satan himself doesn't even know that. He doesn't know that it's over yet. It continues. He has an accurate knowledge of the sins which he has tempted them to commit, and he presents these before God in the most exaggerated light, representing this people to be just as deserving as himself of exclusion from the favor of God. He declares that the Lord cannot in justice forgive their sins and yet destroy him and his angels. He claims them as his prey and demands that they be given into his hands to destroy. Now, this reference is also published under the subtitle, The Great Time of Trouble Begins After Probation Closes, in the book Last Day Events. But again, that's simply a publisher's decision. But it mentions this time of trouble again. This time of trouble. Again, the word this implies that there are other troubles. So far we have two times of troubles that each begin with the close of probation. There is, however, mention of another time of trouble in the spirit of prophecy, which clearly happens before probation closes. And so therein, within Adventism, to separate that trouble from what Daniel calls a time of trouble such as never was, this period of trouble, which happens before probation closes, has been dubbed or coined as the little time of trouble. Now, I want to just say this. There is no promise that it will be little. Did you get that? We sometimes use the term little because this other is called the great, but I think it might be better called lesser, the lesser time of trouble. It doesn't mean that it's little, friends. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be terrible to go through. In fact, during this time will be when all the martyrs happen, because the martyrs will not happen after probation closes. Well, here's a little a line chart I have here. You have a line on the left with the close of probation. This little time of trouble, which we really probably are in right now, the beginnings of it, comes to the close of probation. After probation closes, you have the great time of trouble and Jacob's time of trouble, and this great time of trouble will go to the coming of Christ. And I'm going to say that Jacob's time of trouble comes very close to that, but at least to the point where God confirms his covenant with his people. Because if you remember the story of Jacob, Jacob knew that Esau was coming. Esau wanted to destroy him, right? But what was Jacob really mostly concerned about? What was his struggle really over? His soul, whether his sins were forgiven or not. And so we will not know when probation closes. But when we see the plagues start to fall, friends, when we who have the light understand and can perceive the picture, we're going to understand that the finality of heaven is over in the judgment. And the question is, are we right or not? Yes. Is it okay or not with us and our soul? And we're going to be searching our souls just like Jacob did in that time. And this will be the internal struggle that we go through during this second part where these great times of trouble are. Now, understanding, and I'm giving you the answer before the question here in a sense, that this little or lesser time of trouble goes to the close of probation. Let's see how we can establish that. In early writings, and this comes from pages 85, paragraph 2, and 85, paragraph 3. It says on page 33, referring to something earlier in the book, is given the following. At the commencement of the time of trouble, we were filled with the Holy Ghost and went forth and proclaimed the Sabbath more fully. Now, if she's speaking here, when she says at the commencement of the time of trouble, if she's speaking about the great time of trouble, what would be the use of going out and preaching the Sabbath more fully if everything was already decided? If you couldn't help anyone, if you couldn't convert anyone, if you couldn't, share the truth with anyone in a way that was going to make a difference. She goes on to say, this view was given in 1847 when there were but very few of the Advent brethren observing the Sabbath, and of these but few supposed that its observance was of sufficient importance to draw a line between the people of God and unbelievers. Now the fulfillment of that view is beginning to be seen. The commencement of that time of trouble, here mentioned, does not refer to the time when the plagues shall begin to be poured out, but to a short period just before they are poured out, while Christ is in the sanctuary. At that time, While the work of salvation is closing, trouble will be coming on the earth, and the nations will be angry, yet held in check so as not to prevent the work of the third angel. And I'm just thankful for that, because even though we see government restraints, we see all kinds of issues happening daily, there's still going to be enough check upon these governments that the message can still be given. During this time, religious liberty in the United States will come to an end. We are told in Great Controversy on page 588.1, the Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power, and under the influence of this threefold union, that is Protestantism, Romanism, and spiritualism, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling on the rights of conscience. This is one of the things that we expect to see in this little time of trouble. During this time, we have this threefold union. Church and state has united to oppose God's people. In Manuscript Release 14, page 161.4, that's MR 14, 161.4, it says, those religious bodies who refuse to hear God's message of warning will be under strong deception and will unite with the civil power to persecute the saints. The Protestant churches, or really Protestant churches, they don't protest anymore, the Protestant churches will unite with the papal power in persecuting the commandment-keeping people of God. This is that power which constitutes the great system of persecution which will exercise spiritual tyranny over the consciences of man. So friends, you know, again, this title, Little Time of Trouble, it's not an inspired title. It's been something coined by man, and I don't think it's accurate. I think it'd be better to call it the lesser time of trouble. But it is actually a great time of trouble for God's people. It is a great time of trouble where the world is going to unite against God's people. And this is when there will be people who will be martyred for Christ. Our people will be before courts. They will even be counted as traitors. In Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6, page 394.2. That's 6T 394.2. It says, there will come a time when, because of our advocacy of Bible truth, we shall be treated as traitors. Now, this statement really tells us a lot more than you might think at first reading about how God's people are going to be viewed. Because when we talk about a traitor is someone who commits what crime? Treason. And treason, as we've noted before, is the worst of all crimes. You can murder someone, terrible. You can rape someone, terrible. You hurt that individual, terrible. But when you commit treason, you endanger not one person or even two persons or even a whole mall in a mass shooting. You endanger a whole nation. In this case, they're going to be saying you're endangering the whole world. The whole world. And so God's people are not going to be looked very well upon. We are also told that those who are faithful to the Sabbath truth will be denounced as enemies of society. In Great Controversy 592.1, those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order, as breaking down the moral restraints of society, causing anarchy and corruption, and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. Their conscientious scruples will be pronounced obstinacy, stubbornness, and contempt of authority. They will be accused of dissatisfaction toward the government. Now again, this is happening before the great time of trouble. There's going to be a lot of bad things happening. A lot of bad things are going to be happening, and the people of God are going to be receiving the blame for these things. And at this time, all earthly support is going to be cut away from God's people. In the Desire of Ages on page 121.3, in the last great conflict and the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break His law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy or sell. Does the Bible say anything about that, being forbidden to buy or sell? Yes, in Revelation 13. In Revelation 14, we have this controversy over the mark of the beast. And you won't be able to buy or sell unless you submit to the mark of the beast. And we know, friends, that this Antichrist beast power that's mentioned in Revelation 13 and on into 14, who creates an image to the beast and is denoted also in Daniel chapter 7 as a little horn power, we know that this is the system of the papal church, right? Now, that doesn't mean there's not some good people in the papal church. There's a lot of good Roman Catholics out there. They love God just like we love Him, maybe more. but they're in a system that is corrupt. And this system has a mark of authority, and its mark is Sunday. And they openly state this, that their mark of authority is the fact that all these Protestant churches observe Sunday when there is not a single scriptural reference or decree or demand anywhere for this to be done. Furthermore, we are told that there will indeed be martyrs in the last days before probation closes. How do we know this? Well, here's one way we know. In Revelation chapter 16, remember those 7 last plagues? In Revelation chapter 16, verse 4 through 6. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of water, and they became what? Blood. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art, and wast, and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. For they, now the they are the people who are receiving the plagues. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. Do you get that? These wicked ones receive blood to drink, for they have shed the blood of saints and even prophets. These are people, friends, who are living right at the end, just after the close of probation. We're not talking about people who lived in the Dark Ages. Get it? We're not talking about people who lived in the 19th century. We're talking about people who live here in the 21st century. And so it tells us that there are going to be martyrs who died before probation closes. And in fact, we know that there are people being martyred now, even now, in certain areas for their faith in Jesus, in China and other places, Iran. But friends, it's coming here too. And it's coming here with a vengeance that we cannot, in our wildest dreams, imagine. Now, in this plague, by the way, just as a footnote, we get an understanding of how God works, in that He is responding with these plagues. He's responding to what man has done during probationary time. What man has done in probationary time, God is now responding to that after probation closes, to what they've done. Read through the plagues, you will see. This is the way it works. In Selected Messages, Book 3, page 397.4, the two armies will stand distinct and separate, and this distinction will be so marked that many who shall be convinced of the truth will come on the side of God's commandment-keeping people. Now, when could that happen? Before or after probation closes? That has happened before. When this grand work is to take place in the battle prior to the last closing conflict, many will be imprisoned, many will flee for their lives from cities and towns, and many will be martyrs for Christ's sake in standing in defense of the truth. You will not be tempted above what you are able to bear. Jesus bore all this and far more. So none of these martyrs, however, will die after the close of probation. It all happens before. Their deaths before probation closes. It acts as seed, if you please, to convince others of the truth and to help convert others. But after probation closes, there would be no need for martyrs. It would not do God's cause any. He's not going to allow His people to suffer beyond that. We have these promises also from the Scripture in Isaiah 33:16. It says, He shall dwell on high, His place of defense shall be the munition of rocks. Bread shall be given Him, His water shall be sure. I'm thankful for that, aren't you? Amen. And in Psalms 27 and verse 5, For in the time of trouble He shall hide me in His pavilion. In the secret of His tabernacle shall He hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. And I just want to say this, if you're living in a city, she says in this prior statement in Selected Messages that people are going to flee the cities. Well, I'm going to tell you what, it may be very difficult to flee the cities if you wait too long. You may not be able to get out of the cities. What are you going to do when there's no gasoline? What are you going to do when they shut the roads down? It's time to be out of the cities now. It's not time to be thinking about getting out of the cities. It's time to be getting out of the cities now. We don't want to be in these cities at that time. This is a statement that will sort of help codify clearly what I was just saying about the blood of the martyrs. If the blood of Christ's faithful witnesses were shed at this time, this is after probation closes, it would not, like the blood of the martyrs, be a seed sown to yield a harvest for God. Their fidelity would not be a testimony to convince others of the truth. For the obdurate heart has beaten back the ways of mercy until they return no more. If the righteous were now left to fall prey to their enemies, it would be a triumph for the prince of darkness. Says the psalmist, in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. Psalms 27:5. Christ had spoken. He says, come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpast. For, behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. Isaiah 26:20 and 21. Glorious will be the deliverance of those who have patiently waited for his coming, and whose names are written in the book of life. And that's Great Controversy 634.1. Friends, we have exceeding great and precious promises for the time soon to come. I want to be one who's faithful, whether God chooses to allow me to live till the coming of Christ or to be a martyr first. We know that those who will die in the faith of the third angel's message, that they're going to be in that special resurrection to see Jesus come, right? Yeah. So I can still see Jesus come whether I'm martyred or not. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd like to live till he comes, but whatever he chooses for me, that's what I want. I have just a few quick passages here from Great Controversy, 3 or 4 paragraphs here I'm going to just quickly read, I think, because I think they give us courage for this time. Can I do that? This is from 621.1. Jacob's history. Remember we talked about Jacob's time trial? Jacob's history is also an assurance that God will not cast off those who have been deceived and tempted and betrayed into sin, but those who have returned unto him with true repentance. While Satan seeks to destroy this class, God will send his angels to comfort and protect them in the time of peril. The assaults of Satan are fierce and determined. His delusions are terrible. But the Lord's eye is upon his people, and his ear listens to their cries. Their affliction is great. The flames of the furnace seem about to consume them, but the refiner, capital R refiner, will bring them forth as gold tried in the fire. God's love for his children during the period of their severest trial is as strong and tender as in the days of their sunniest prosperity. But it is needful for them to be placed in the furnace of fire. Their earthliness must be consumed, that the image of Christ may be perfectly reflected. Now, that's an interesting statement you might want to give some thought to. Their sin has been forgiven, but there's an earthliness that has to be consumed out of them yet. Continuing on page 621.2 now, and I've broken this into 2 parts. The season of distress and anguish before us will require a faith that can endure weariness, delay, and hunger. Let me just pause for a minute. You ever get hungry? When was the last time you didn't have any food for a day or 2 days or maybe 3 days? Now, I know Brother Allen here, he had a fast one time. How many days was your fast? 11, 13 days? 11 days. It's a long time to fast. I've never fasted long. I think 3 days is the longest I've ever fasted. But friends, when we think that we're hungry, most of the time, we're really not hungry. Not like it's speaking about here. Not at all. You know, Paul says he was hungry at times. He didn't get the support he needed from the churches. And he went without things that were necessary. God's people are going to be put in a situation where they're going to have a trial. And they must have a faith that can endure weariness, because you're going to get tired. Delay, because it's going to seem like things have been delayed. And hunger, a faith that will not faint, though severely tried. The period of probation is granted to all to prepare for that time. So that's what we're supposed to be doing right now. Jacob prevailed because he was persevering and determined. His victory is an evidence of the power of importunate prayer. All who will lay hold of God's promises, as he did, and be as earnest and persevering as he was, will succeed as he succeeded. Can you say amen to that? I guess you can. Can you say amen to that? Amen. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Continuing. Those who are unwilling to deny self, to agonize before God, to pray long and earnestly for his blessing, will not obtain it. Will not. This is a statement of fact. This is an indicative statement. Wrestling with God, how few know what it is. How few have ever had their souls drawn out after God with intensity of desire until every power is on the stretch. But Jacob did, didn't he? And that's why this is called Jacob's time of trouble for those people. When waves of despair, which no language can express, sweep over the supplicant, how few cling with unyielding faith to the promises of God. You know, friends, we have troubles, we have things happen. I think of when my son Hans died. I think of when he was sick and we knew he was dying. And this little road between my house and the Ford's house, I walked it several times, back and forth, just weeping and crying and praying to God. Why? 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 He's one of the good ones. Why him, Lord? Why not some drug dealer? Someone's out here, making havoc with people's lives. And there's always going to be things, friends, on this side that we don't understand. God doesn't ask us to understand everything. He doesn't ask us to know everything. I'm not alone here among people who probably have asked why at times. But God does ask us to have faith and to trust Him. And to trust Him that He has a plan, and His plan is best. Those who are unwilling to deny self, to agonize before God, to pray long and earnestly for His blessing will not obtain it. How true that is. And then she says, and this is continuing great controversy on page 622.1, those who exercise but little faith now are in the greatest danger of falling under the power of satanic delusions and the decree to compel the conscience. And if they endure the test, they will be plunged into deeper distress and anguish in the time of trouble because they have never made it a habit to trust in God. When you get a habit, it's something that becomes automatic. It should be automatic for us to trust God. The lessons of faith which they have neglected, they will be forced to learn under a terrible pressure of discouragement. And so, 622.2, we should now acquaint ourselves with God. By proving His promises, angels record every prayer that is earnest and sincere. We should rather dispense with selfish gratification than neglect communion with God. The deepest poverty, the greatest self-denial, with His approval, is better than riches, honors, ease, and friendship without it. We must take time to pray. If we allow our minds to be absorbed by worldly interests, the Lord may give us time by removing from us our idols of gold, of houses, or of fertile lands. Well, friends, if He chooses to remove them, then it's probably a good thing because we're being prevented by them from doing what we need to do. So, in quick summation, we see in inspiration at least 3 times of trouble. Okay? I'm going to just go back to a particular slide here that I can find quickly. There's this little time of trouble, which we call it a little time of trouble because somehow that name got coined to it, but I'm going to call it a lesser time of trouble. But it's still a great time of trouble for the people. This is when the people are going to be martyred. This is when the people are going to be fleeing from their homes. They're not waiting to the great time of trouble to do that, friends. No. They'll be doing that before. And it comes up to the time of close of probation. And then you have this great time of trouble that just encompasses the whole world. The whole world is a mess. You have the 7 last plagues. You have, the waters turning to blood, this great earthquake and all these things happening. Hailstones, the weight of a talent, etc. And that will continue till Christ comes. But for God's people, after probation closes, they will go through a period we call Jacob's time of trouble. And I didn't have time to put in, but there's a voice from heaven where God confirms His covenant with His people just before Jesus comes. And at that point, if not before, the people of God will know who they are. And there will be no question then. And their time of Jacob's trouble can be over. But we don't, and how long this is, we don't know. There's different ideas prophetically. Some people think it's going to be a year. We really don't know. But it's a relatively short time. But I'm going to tell you, it's going to seem like a long time to us. It will seem long. It will seem like there's plenty. And we'll wish it's over. But God has a purpose and a plan and everything. And if we can be part of God's plan in standing for Him and vindicating His character and to stand before a holy God without a mediator and be faithful, then I want to do that, don't you? I want to do that. Even if I have to go through trouble. Little time of trouble, lesser time of trouble, greater time of trouble, Jacob's trouble. Sounds like a lot of trouble. But friends, we have a greater Savior than we have trouble. We have one who's able to save to the uttermost all who come to him by faith and ask for help. And so that's what I want. But friends, this is the time of preparation. This is the time that we need to be getting out of the cities. We need to be getting our spiritual lives in order. We need to be keeping all the commandments of God, friends. All the commandments of God. Because God's not going to excuse us for one. You know, James says that if you break one commandment, you've broke them all. And he doesn't make excuses. God doesn't play favorites, friends. And yet, even though he's no respecter of persons, he's made enough provision with enough mercy and enough grace that he can save me. And he can save you too. How about it?